All right, welcome everyone to Ceph Month 2021. Josh and I are going to give a quick update on the Ceph project, and then we'll be moving on to a few other talks. So I'm going to start with a little bit of Ceph background that will be familiar to anyone who's been using Ceph, but should be helpful for those who are new. Talk a little bit about Ceph Month, give an update on the Ceph Foundation and what we've been up to. A quick update on the Ceph, the SEPIA lab, where we do all our upstream testing and release stuff. We'll talk a little bit about telemetry and then talk a bit about the future and what we see coming next. So just a level set, what is Ceph? People describe Ceph as software-defined storage, as a unified storage system, as scalable distributed storage, or even the future of storage or Linux of storage. These are all nice words, but are a little bit meaningless. In a little bit more concrete terms, Ceph is open source software. It's a software-defined system. Doesn't rely on any particular piece of hardware because you can run it on any sort of commodity parts. That means commodity servers, IP networks, hard drives, SSDs, NVMe's, and so on. And it's unified in that a single cluster can serve object, block, and file workloads simultaneously. So Ceph is free and open source software. That means you have the freedom to use the software, free as in beer. You have the freedom to introspect, modify, and share. Free as in speech, so you get the source code and you can modify it as you see fit. That gives you the freedom from lock-in to a particular vendor and gives you the freedom to innovate by extending and improving the platform. Ceph is also reliable. That means that we believe Ceph should be a reliable source system that's built out of unreliable components with no single source of failure. We provide data durability via replication or erasure coding, and there are no interruptions of service from rolling upgrades or online expansion or contraction of the cluster. And Ceph is always designed to favor consistency and correctness over performance, although obviously we'd try to get both. And also Ceph is designed to be scalable. So it's an elastic storage infrastructure, which means that the cluster may grow or shrink over time as your needs change or as hardware is refreshed. That means you can add and remove hardware while the system is online and under load. And we allow Ceph to scale up with bigger and faster hardware. We scale out by adding more hardware, more systems, and more racks to a single cluster to provide more capacity and performance. And we also allow you to federate multiple clusters across multiple sites with asynchronous replication features and disaster recovery capabilities. And on top of all this, Ceph is a unified system. That means that we can provide object, block, and file interfaces from the same storage cluster, which is built on this Rados component, which handles all the replication and data distribution in the system. We release Ceph every year in March. So we have a stable named release every 12 months. We provide backports for 2 releases. So that means bug fixes and security updates. That means that a release will reach its end of life shortly after the newer release that's 2 years after that. So for example, Nautilus is reaching end of life right about now that Pacific is out. So we just did a security bug fix release a couple weeks ago. We're going to do one more stable release for Nautilus, then it'll be done. But you can upgrade 2 releases at a time, so those Nautilus users can upgrade all the way to Pacific, 2 years newer. And so on. We provide packages, Debian and RPM release packages on the upstream Ceph website, as well as container images. And recently we've been working on some process improvements in this area. So we're getting better at doing the security hotfixes quickly and getting them out simultaneously for multiple stable branches, and are working on a more regular cadence for those stable releases. So a little bit about Ceph Month, which is where you are right now, June 21. So our goal for Ceph Month is be a little bit more interactive and bite-sized. The background here is that obviously COVID happened. A year ago, we were going to do CEPHALOCON in Seoul, and that got canceled because it was right when the outbreak originally happened. We did not plan an in-person event this year either, obviously, because the pandemic is still continuing. But we wanted to give people an update on the project and provide venue. But we didn't want sort of like a full-blown virtual conference that took all day and had you sitting in front of Zoom. for extended periods of time. So the idea is to spread it out over several weeks and have sort of bite-sized chunks. So a couple hours at a time with a couple talks to bring people in, and try to make it more interactive so we can have more questions and interactivity with the speakers, and also have some free-form discussion just so users can network and share experiences. So a couple hours at a time, maybe 2 blocks a week with a few planned talks, and that unstructured time, and some lightning talks sprinkled throughout. There's an Etherpad with a link there at the bottom that should be in the chat. Feel free to add questions there. And also at the bottom for that particular day, there's an area to just add any topics that you want to discuss sort of after these presentations. So you'll have all the developers online and other users and so on. We can talk about really whatever you want. This first week, we're going to talk about this project update. We'll talk about Rados and the new Windows support that we're working on. Next week will be Rados Gateway and a number of performance talks. The week after that is RBD, dashboard, and more lightning talks. And then the final week we'll have CephFS and Ceph ADM. So please open up the pad and add whatever you'd like. Next year we would like to do another CEPHALOCON. And assuming we do, it would be in March 2022. But we don't have any definite plans yet. But we don't know where we would hold it. We could go back to doing it in Seoul, which is where we had planned to do it 2 years ago, or 1 year ago, but didn't. We could also go for something in North America. After Seoul was canceled, we were talking with Linux Foundation about possible venues, and Portland came up as sort of a leading contender for sort of price location balance. But really, we don't have any specific plans here. So if you guys have suggestions about which region and so on, please let us know. We hope to have an in-person event, but it's sort of an open question whether we want to try to invest in making it more of a hybrid type of thing where you can also participate remotely, or if we should just focus on having sort of a more traditional conference. We're interested in your feedback, so please let us know. A bit of an update on the Ceph Foundation. As most of you are probably aware, we created a foundation a couple of years ago to support the Ceph project, essentially to get industry stakeholders to pool financial resources together that we can use to support the community. So we have a number of premier members now, 12. A couple new entrants are Bloomberg joined in the last year. And a number of general members as well. New members here are Cloudbase and Vexos. And then a number of associate members as well. These are educational institutions and government institutions and nonprofits and so on. So current projects that the foundation is focused on. One that we started a couple of years ago is an effort to improve the Ceph documentation. We have a full-time technical writer, Zach Dover, who's on contract for a couple of years now. Hopefully you've noticed some improvements on the Ceph docs as a result of his efforts. We also have a website update that's in progress for the last several months, or 6 months maybe, even a year, a while now. That effort has been spearheaded by SoftIron, one of our premier members. We're very grateful for their efforts there. We're shifting away from WordPress, so it's going to be a static site generated from GitHub. You can go ahead and take a look at the source code there, and there's a sort of a tentative site, whatever, development site. We're hoping to launch this within the next month or so, so stay tuned. Another new project that we're just kicking off is around training materials. So here we're working with the Linux Foundation's training group to build out online course material to help people learn how to use Ceph. JC Lopez, who was responsible for a lot of the training material way back in the Ink Tank days, is helping put together a lot of that. And we're hoping to get an initial set of Ceph, like 101 type courses together online. These can be either hosted on edX platform or LF has their own thing. They can support both sort of self-led or instructor-led courses. So there's the potential to have more advanced courses later, even like paid certifications and so on. We don't really have any specific plans here. We're focused right now on just having some initial free material there to spread the level of Ceph expertise within the community. But we're excited about pursuing this new direction. Other things we're doing, we're drastically reducing. Sorry, my headset always turns off. We're drastically reducing the amount of money that the foundation has been spending with public cloud providers to host a lot of the infrastructure by buying hardware to put in the CEPIA lab instead. It's much more cost effective. And so at this point, we've basically are only putting public-facing content in OVH, so things like the tracker and the Ceph website and download.ceph.com. So we're pretty happy about that. We're saving a bunch of money there. And buying lab hardware. So that's hardware for doing builds, for doing CI tests, all the GitHub checks and stuff that we do. And we're also expanding the Ceph cluster that's in the lab that we use to store all of our Ceph results and so on. Windows support is coming along. We're contracting with Cloudbase to do a lot of this initial development and to set up all the upstream CI and testing and stuff to do that. So we're very excited. We're going to hear more about that from Alessandro in about 45 minutes. And also there's a new marketing committee. Right now, SoftIron, Canonical, and Red Hat are participating, but we're eager to have anybody else join in. Essentially, the idea here is to coordinate sort of upstream project-focused marketing activity and press and so on for the community. So we're excited about that. And Josh, I can turn it over to you if you want to talk about new stuff in the lab.
Sure, thanks, Sage. So like Sage mentioned, we've recently been expanding some of the lab hardware to help us with building Ceph faster and many more builds in parallel, as well as adding more test nodes to the infrastructure to let us run more tests. With the pace of Ceph developments, we are continually needing to expand our test coverage and run larger scale tests as well. So another key piece of that has been some improvements in our test infrastructure called Tethology. We had a Google Summer of Code student last summer who changed the model there so that we could actually run larger scale tests by locking many machines at once and not having kind of competition for lab resources. And there's more work in progress on this by another developer, Aishwarya, who is moving from the current in-memory queue into and moving that into a Postgres database, which will allow us to have much more intelligent scheduling of our test lab. So that should be able to help us use the lab much more efficiently and get a lot more interesting testing done, especially at larger scales within the lab. Another area we want to focus on in the future is downgrade testing. This would means testing downgrades within a given major release. So from one minor point release to the previous one, or perhaps to the previous few. This will give us some confidence that we're not making any kind of backwards compatible changes, and let us kind of guarantee that users will be able to downgrade themselves if they encounter some kind of bug after an upgrade. This is much easier now with containers and Ceph ADM, since you don't have to worry about all kinds of package dependencies between different daemons. You're just replacing one container at a time. So look for this to come in the future. See if you could go to the next slide. Another major aspect of the future is different architectures. A big one is ARM. So Ampere donated a bunch of hardware to the lab, and we're now building packages and container images for CenterState and Ubuntu Focal. We had to address a number of issues in Podman and Quay and to support multiple architectures, but things are improving there. We're already seeing a number of users try this out on hardware as small as Raspberry Pis for home clusters, and we're excited to see where that ARM hardware goes in the future. In terms of broader usage, one topic we wanted to talk about today was telemetry. So Ceph has had a telemetry module that allows users to opt in to share some of the data with Ceph developers. And there's a public dashboard that displays a lot of information about kind of which versions are running. And currently we have over 1,000 clusters reporting telemetry with, as you can see, over 300 petabytes of storage. The orange here is Octopus. These are different versions, and the little red there is Pacific. So Pacific was just released around that time where you see that line starting to get increased, and Octopus has leveled off. So you can see users are upgrading now to Pacific, and now that it's out, which is great to see. But telemetry is all opt-in. It requires you to explicitly acknowledge the license for it, and there are a number of different channels that you can choose to opt in or out of. There's the basic information, which has like basic metadata about the cluster, like how big it is, what version it is. There is crash metadata, which really helps us developers understand what kinds of problems people are actually running into in real life, and whether something in the we're seeing maybe in our tests once out of maybe 100 runs is a very common problem in the field, or if it's really limited to our hardware. We've already seen some great use of this when we had a buggy version of tcmalloc in the container image that was causing a bunch of crashes in RGW. We saw a bunch of those show up via telemetry. So we understood that was a big problem for folks and worked quickly to fix it. There's also a device channel for capturing metrics about which kind of disks are in use, as well as health data like smart from those disks. This helps us try to improve our disk prediction model that tries to give you an idea of whether your device is likely to fail soon or not. There's an optional identity channel that lets you provide some contact information like an email address in case developers would like to contact you about your cluster. And in the future, we're working on a performance channel to add a bit more granular information about how the cluster is used in terms of like what kinds of read versus write patterns we see in the cluster, what kind of cache hit rates there are, other sorts of information like that will help us understand how well Ceph is working at different levels with real workloads and what kinds of real workloads we see in real life. This will help with the developers optimizing Ceph, as well as potentially making tuning for users more of a closed loop feedback you could get through the telemetry dashboards. But as all kind of a work in progress, and we're going to be very transparent about what we're collecting with this. When you're enabling telemetry, you can also grab the JSON report that includes all this information and inspect it yourself to see precisely what is being shared and what isn't. Save to think on the next slide, we have a little bit of information from the most recent Ceph user survey, asking whether folks enable telemetry, and we see about a quarter of the responders have it enabled on every cluster. Another 50% or so have it enabled on some clusters, and 60% don't have it enabled yet. There's a wide range of reasons for this. The most common answer is the cluster's on a protected network that doesn't have access to the internet. Fortunately, we have a solution for this. You can add a SOX proxy to the telemetry module and have it report through that. That one's pretty easy to solve. Second most common is haven't gotten around to it yet. Well, as we'll show you in the next slide, it's just a couple commands, so we're hoping to help spread the knowledge of how to do this. So you can use the Ceph telemetry show command to see what would be shared, as well as the show device to see what the device information would be. And then you can turn on telemetry and add the SOX proxy information if your cluster isn't connected to the internet. That's all it takes. Now we'd like to talk a little bit about where we see Ceph going in the future. In general, I think there are kind of three major aspects that we want to focus on for Ceph. There's, of course, the basic reliability, which is the baseline of a storage system. You expect it to be stable and not lose your data. Of course, and then secondly, there's user experience. So out-of-the-box experience is a big thing for Ceph, and it's been drastically improved over the last several years with the dashboard and CephADM. And CephADM is also including more making it much easier to manage the entire cluster from installing it out of the box via a single command to kind of helping you set up more end user protocols that would take more effort than with other systems. So you can really easily set up a small cluster as a kind of NAS replacement, and we're working on kind of turnkey support for NFS and object storage, and with Samba coming in Quincy. The third major aspect for Ceph is, of course, adapting to evolutions in data centers and hardware, especially in relation to performance. So there are a number of new classes of devices coming along down the pipe. They're at varying stages of development. Some are already available for purchase today. Some are still in kind of standardization phases. But we're looking at a number of these, especially in the context of like Crimson rework of the OSD to take advantage of these incredibly fast storage devices, which have really shifted the bottlenecks over the last 5 to 10 years from the disk to the CPU. But we'll see a lot more discussion about what exactly that means in terms of Crimson later in the Ceph month. But for now, just be aware that this is kind of where we're dealing with all these kinds of different new hardware and new devices. And it's being designed in a way that's flexible and composable enough to work with any of these well. Another major emerging technology is NVMe over Fabrics. The NVMe protocol has been around for a long time, just as a local storage protocol for devices, especially flash devices. And more recently, the Fabric side of it has enabled access to remote devices as well, without involving potentially the CPU on the other side. So this can save a whole lot of the most precious resource that in the data center today, which is your CPU power. There's a project underway already to look at tackling this on the client side in terms of presenting an RBD device over the NVMe over Fabrics as an alternative to iSCSI. So this could be used as like a metal on a service for cloud infrastructure, where you're exposing a disk directly to a host, and it looks like a plain NVMe disk. So almost any kind of host could talk to it directly. There's some new hardware out there, like SmartNIC style hardware, like NVIDIA's Bluefield chip, that allow you to do this without involving the host CPU at all. There's also some discussion on further future plans for Crimson, kind of a second phase of it, which would involve changing the replication style of the OSD to avoid needing to involve the CPUs on the replicas in the replication path at all. So that would be a massive decrease in the CPU requirements. If you have a three times replication, that would be cutting out the CPUs from those two replicas would be a 2/3 reduction, which would be huge. That's a very large project, so that's further in the future. We expect there'll be more things like this to come. Finally, there's a large ecosystem of software around Ceph that Ceph integrates with. Some of these things are maturing, like Rook in the Kubernetes space, and there's also more support for Knative via RGW, especially with the bucket notifications APIs and things like S3 Select, which let you work with all kinds of software like Spark that treats the very large-scale object store almost like a database. There's also a lot of efforts around data movement in general and multi-site with interoperability between a private cloud and a public cloud in particular. This will probably be described a bit more in the RGW talks later this month, but some of it involves kind of replication between a private data center and a public cloud, as well as within a public cloud, and being able to choose different backends for each of those. There's also some newer emerging de facto standards in the industry, like Apache Arrow / Parquet. These are kind of general data formats for used for a large number of tools, especially in the machine learning and data science space, which are giving storing data in a very efficient format for queries, as well as enabling queries to be saved as kind of like what you might call a materialized view in the relational database world. So you can have multiple steps in your pipeline that kind of trade these views of the data and then expose them to subsequent steps without any of the data or computation leaving the cluster. You can essentially shift a lot of the CPU cycles into the massive storage cluster you have and off of the maybe a single client. So what's coming after Quincy? Well, we haven't figured out a name exactly yet, but there we have an Etherpad with the URL there. And the current leader is Ceph Rogan. So please go and vote, because I'm not sure that that's the best name we can come up with here. It's apparently the name of a squid at the Vancouver Aquarium. I think that's all we have for the project update. So if there's any questions, we can take a couple now.
And looking at the Etherpad, there was a mention about the Crimson update, but it looks like you covered that.
Yeah, I think we'll discuss Crimson at least briefly in a minute. And I think we might want to schedule a larger Crimson update later in the month as well.
Great. I put the links in the chat for the pad with our names. Usually I go through Wikipedia or something similar and try to find all the common names for cephalopod species that start with R. I haven't done that yet, so maybe something good will come up there. Or if somebody else is feeling motivated, feel free.